much appreciated, and thank you all for being here today. I understand that there was a late night party, and that it was super exciting. Was it super exciting? Parties are something I find incredibly awkward, but I feel like this would have been a good one. And awkwardness is one of the themes that we'll come back to today. But first, I wanted to start by talking about chickens. Specifically, a special species of chicken. This species of chicken lives underwater, in the Pacific Ocean. I grew up learning about these chickens. They were the chickens of the sea. They laid eggs that would hatch and be turned into food that would come to us in cans. I learned about the culture of these chickens and their king, who was like the super big chicken in the water. And of course, these chickens never existed. But I grew up learning about these chickens from my grandfather, who constantly told stories of things that were not true, as if they were true. I learned when I was little about the time that my father was speeding so fast down the highway to Las Vegas in California that a helicopter landed on the roof of our car to give us a speeding ticket. And because I learned this so young, I remember it as if it was real. I'd be a terrible eyewitness. I've struggled sometimes thinking back to that moment and thinking, how could that not have happened? I come from a family that is not originally from the United States. My family and I are from a long, skinny country off the coast of the Pacific Ocean, so we're near the chickens, but that country is called Chile. Has anyone ever been to Chile? It's next to Argentina. They're much better known. Now, the reason I ended up learning English and speeding along the highways of California is because when I was small, super small, my dad did something exciting that I recommend to anyone who ever needs to have some adventure, called illegal immigration to the United States. It worked out okay. The wall was shorter, the jumps were not as bad. But one thing that Chile is known for, and much of Latin America, is a literary movement. Perhaps you've heard of it, called magic realism. Magic realism is a form of storytelling in which the real and the magical live side by side, and the magical is not addressed as if it were magical. Weird things just happen. Strange things can sit on someone's shoulder. You could have an entire magic realist story in which a person walks around with this creature on their shoulder and no one addresses it at all. A magic realist story in which a person wanders off and comes back from the dead wearing a suit. And it's not in fact the fact that they came back from the dead that is interesting. The story is just about the suit. So a lot of what I've had the privilege of doing at the World Scholars Cup, and that I want to talk about today, is bringing that element of whimsy, imagination, and magic realism to our education with students. Because sometimes, if I had to summarize it, I'd say we focus too much on the real and not enough on the magic. I don't mean magic in the magician sense, of course. I could never do a card trick for the life of me. But the interesting thing about magic is it's not just about tricks. Magic is about belief that things can happen and about distinguishing them, being able to accept that you're watching an act and still enjoying it as if it were real. And that's super important. So, one of the ways that at the World Scholars Cup we create this kind of culture is through this creature. This is the mascot of the World Scholars Cup. It is very good. Not everyone recognizes an alpaca. How many of you are principals in this hall? Principals, I have great respect for you. But about a year and a half ago, in Qatar, best known for football stadiums that may or may not have been built ethically, I was at a British school, and the principal walked me to the door at the end, after a presentation like this, except to a much, let's say, a slightly less senior audience. And at the door, the principal said to me, "Good talk. Now can you leave me your unicorn?" This was deeply upsetting, if also joyful, because, of course, my alpaca lacks the number one characteristic of a unicorn. It has no corn. And this is a line I've delivered to hundreds of scholars, thousands of scholars over the last year, that an alpaca has no corn. And not a single scholar has objected, saying that a unicorn has a horn. Because if you go into a presentation with students or an interaction and simply start building in the whimsy from the start, then they are happy to accept it. They know what you're doing. They know that you know that a unicorn does not have a corn. But they are so happy to play along with you. And the World Scholars Cup is full of examples like that, in which, stay. Okay, well, the plants can prop him up. In which you can appeal to that same sense of joy in learning the impossible that I had with my grandfather when I was learning about the chickens of the sea. Now, that sounds vague, and I'm going to talk a little more specifically about how we do that at the World Scholars Cup. But it's not just something that can be done, I think, in academic competitions. I was thinking back over the last few days as I was approaching this moment to my own high school, and I had one teacher in particular who did almost exactly this in her everyday classes. Her name, she's still retired, she's alive, retired, Dr. Serfati. She called herself El Arbol, or the tree in Spanish. She had us all call her Señora Arbol, as if she was actually a tree. In fact, she would refuse to answer to any other name but Arbol. And she would give us homework assignments which mixed fiction about the American presidency at the time with ecosystems. We learned about, I don't know if any of you remember this far back, there was a vice president called Dan Quayle that did not have a great reputation. Dan Quayle was a regular figure in her homework assignments as a creature that slowly transformed into a leopard for some reason. But all year long, this kind of playfulness was embodied in her work. And she was, in fact, not the most celebrated teacher educationally at the school. She was eventually asked to retire in part because her approach was so unorthodox. But for those of us who were in her class, we loved the way that she combined fact and fiction and never called out either as the other. One reason I think this kind of approach matters, and what we do at the World Scholars Cup has, I think, currency that is relevant these days, is because we now live in a time in which we are stained culturally with purposeful misinformation or even disinformation designed to confuse and divide us, right? In any given political campaign, but even beyond, you'll see everything from deep fakes to pernicious Facebook rumors. And one reason I think that people are so vulnerable to them is because schools don't spend enough time teaching the unreal. If we spend more time mixing the fiction with the fact, then when people encounter fiction and fact later, they'll have a better radar for it. If all you ever learn is what the truth is, then everything you see has to either be absolutely true or absolutely false. But in reality, most things are a mix of the imagined and the real. So, at the World Scholars Cup, we really, really hold to that. How many of you are from schools that have done this program, the World Scholars Cup? Fantastic. That's approximately 118% of you. And see, that's exactly what I would do for the students. I begin every one of my presentations this year talking about data science and polling because of the recent American presidential election with its interesting result. And after setting it up as if I'm going to take a poll of who has done the program before, I always come back to them with something like 180% or 210%. And for the students, that sudden twist that the teacher or the person with knowledge authority is able to be playful with something like statistics brings them in. It opens the door so that they can also be playful right back. And every single class with every single student in the world, I truly believe, is full of children who, to a certain age, are always doing make-believe and fun and mixing fact and fiction, right? That's what childhood play is about. People make sandcastles. We get little toy figurines. We build things out of Legos, or if we're using Minecraft, we're telling stories to ourselves. Schools have too long, I think, divided that from what we do in the classroom, instead of building it in. 2 weeks ago, at an event in China, in Shenzhen. China is a place where students are really very much fed mostly, except at some, of course, international schools with certain curricula, but mostly strangled with facts. And I use the word strangled very specifically because it can be overwhelming. So when they come to an event like the World Scholars Cup, which we hold, and you're meeting them at an opening ceremony, things start to happen as they realize it's okay. We had one scholar who was sitting next to the wall, and when he realized it was okay to do so, he decided to declare to the audience that the wall was his teammate. The wall gave him support. The wall was always there to bounce ideas back from. And for us, seeing that happen, that's exactly what we want, because suddenly the student is playing right back. And at the World Scholars Cup, as a year proceeds and we have local events all over the world, you never know exactly what will happen. But you always have to be open to the fact that the students might be bringing cool ideas and story bits that will carry to the next one. There's a world in which we took that little moment with the wall and went to the next event and taught students everywhere that walls are good teammates. One year, we in fact did that with chairs. All over the world, we went round to round, event to event in 60 countries, and we reminded students that they should be grateful for the things we often take for granted. For example, the chairs you're sitting in. Chairs support us every single day. They are never jealous when we sit in other chairs. So we asked every student to pat their chair twice and say, "Thank you, chair." I ask you now to do the same. All year long, we did this to great results with the chairs getting thanked. So occasionally one got gnawed on by a hungry student, but it's all right. And then every summer, we bring together students from all our local events at giant global events. We've had many over the years. We've got many wonderful students from India that join us at these events. These tend to bring in maybe 1,000 or 3,000 students from many countries. And there, we have a chance to bring together the story threads. So at our events in 2019, the year of the chair, they came to our global event in, say, The Hague or in Beijing, and when the curtains opened, there was a giant chair, 6 meters tall. And next to the giant chair were 2 smaller chairs. And we sang an entire song called "Have You Thanked Your Chair Today?" weaving together bits of what they'd been learning throughout the year. Now, in the World Scholars Cup, that's just what seems to be like an odd story point. But what you create doing that is a culture in which the students can also add their own voices to the story, in which you see on social media people talking about their chair, they give their chairs names. They're studying science and technology and social studies and anthropology and literature and poetry, but they're also having conversations with the thing they're sitting on. That's so different than you get in a lot of situations. But it doesn't need to be. So my hope is that everyone, every teacher out there, can be encouraged to meet their students where they're at and to listen for the things that students find interesting, the things that students find impossible but intriguing. You could go into a classroom and do almost anything if you want to be playful with it. I was talking to some of my hosts here today about kumquats. Has anyone here ever had a kumquat? It's a Chinese fruit that looks like a small orange. It has vitamin C and will fight scurvy, which makes it very useful, especially if you don't want to go blind. As a kind of storytelling experiment last year, we decided that we would start including the word kumquat in our program a great deal. We had answer choices or test questions about kumquats. And by the time we got to this year's global round, we had students who were singing a song called 15 Randomness Kumquats. We sang it to them first very poorly. Anything can become a thing if you repeat it and if you find joy in it. In my high school days, I was a super serious student. Many of you might have been too. It's why we find our way to education sometimes. You probably know students who you think they would never want to dance around a kumquat. They would not light a fire and bring a chair leg and worship the chair. They'd think this was weird and culty. They want to be studying for their mocks. But in fact, as a student, I was part of that academic decathlon that was mentioned in the introduction, and I had the great fortune of being the highest scorer at the time that it ever happened. But for me, that journey was not about the achievement of a high score. The surprise for me was that in my teammates that I studied with, I found whimsy and story. The program was very dry. You took many multiple choice tests. But in my teammates, I learned the following. I learned that one of them would only study on the toilet. So he mostly went to study in the faculty bathroom because it was clean. This presented a problem for team bonding. We wanted to see more of him. Solution. We found a discarded toilet on the side of the street, brought it to our classroom, and put it in its place on the seating chart. And for the rest of the year, there was a toilet in the classroom. Why not? When our teacher arrived the next morning, he broke down laughing. Then he called the principal over to see it. And after some discussion, they decided as long as we kept it clean and no one actually used it as a toilet, it could sit in the classroom. And I think every classroom could use a little bit of that kind of strange, wonderful spark that comes when you let the students have that kind of whimsy. At the World Scholars Cup, we have the fortune of having a self-selected group that come to us because of this kind of thing, but also many students who arrive not expecting it. They often do competitions like Olympiads, or take tests like those you probably have in the CBSE and other systems in which things are dry, and they're dry for a reason because there's a lot of knowledge to be assimilated and maybe these other things seem distracting. But if you look not at magic realist literature, but at children's literature, the most successful works and novels that stand the test of time in children's literature are not the ones where children sit and study and behave well. They're the ones where children, in some sense, subvert adult authority and structures, and usually with the help of someone who is an adult who gets them. Maybe it's an old librarian that invites students to live overnight in their house. Maybe it's something from Oz. Whatever it is, there's always someone who helps the children. There was a series that I was inspired by that you probably have not heard of because it was not popular, called The Three Investigators. Did you read it? Wonderful. So it's three teenagers, actually preteens, who were solving mysteries that adults couldn't figure out. But they did have one adult who would guide them. At first it was, do you remember? I forget the name of the guy who took over. At first it was like Sherlock Holmes who was helping them out, and then older detective fiction. Yeah, I don't know I never saw the movie, sadly. The series was very long, not terribly well written. Maybe, toward the end. Everything can have magic in it, see. And they created a little shelter inside a junkyard, and they called that their headquarters. Students are always looking to find a junkyard in which to build their headquarters. It can be built with chairs. It can be built with kumquats. It can be built everywhere if you're open to that kind of fun. And I think adults are also sometimes desperately in need of this. We stop playing enough. Playing is a way to activate the imagination, but it's also a way to connect with students who miss playing a lot. These alpacas, they form the backbone of the program. We say they represent many things, but for our youngest students, they sometimes just do the World Scholars Cup because they want an alpaca. That's understandable. They're 10 years old, 11 years old, they want stuffed animals. But the really cool thing is that our 17 and 18-year-olds also want the alpacas. They love them because they know they're not supposed to. And in that journey from loving them because of what they are to loving them because you're not supposed to is a lot of the arc of adolescence, but it's also something that we as teachers and educators can jump aboard and have fun with. If the students recognize our teachers as being with them in playing with adult expectations of what students in school should be, then they will engage more. So it's okay to go into a history lesson, say, and I'll just use a US example because, poor guy. He's new. I left mine on a plane yesterday here. He can sit up here. This was meant to be a metaphor about how learning doesn't have to be black and white, but sometimes. There we go. You can go to a history lesson about the American Revolutionary War and start with an anecdote about how George Washington and his apple tree was less true than George Washington, and how he rode into battle on a Ford Mustang. And you could talk about the Ford Mustang for about 10 minutes before students realize this is clearly not true. But you can actually move from a story that is not true to a story about technological differences between opponents very quickly. It's really easy to make a transition from the unreal to the real. For these alpacas, we tell the students that if you give the small ones sunlight and water, they will grow into the large ones. And everyone knows it's not true, but everyone says it anyway. And then people begin talking about how if you give sunlight and water to the other students, they will also grow larger and more colorful. It's crazy that you can get thousands of students who agree to a world of make-believe that we're making up together. But it's not really crazy, because that's just what the childhood imagination is about. There we go. And it's a tough thing to ask because you can't make it too structured. If you go in and say, students, this is an outline of the imaginary things that we'll pretend are real today, they will lose interest. That's an adult authoritarian Imagineer. You need to go in there and just start dropping them in, like Easter eggs in a story. One reason that before they went bad, the Marvel movies were as popular as they were is because there was such deep lore connecting them where people could go in looking for hints from one movie to the next, just like you might in a great work of literature. Look for those bits that foreshadow. Look for the gun on the mantle. And if you're doing this right in school, you can do the same thing with story beats that repeat. You don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to draw too much attention to it. If you do that, then students will withdraw and disengage. It's so interesting because being a student and being a teenager is so much about wanting to rebel, but also wanting to have someone who helps you in the rebelling. And we can be those people that help them. And the rest of society can be the hard thing. Schools should be where they find their adult playmates and colleagues and those who see them for what they are, which is people that still are able to imagine and come up with ideas, and that you will seize those ideas and share them. So at the World Scholars Cup, we're more than just, of course, on a program about alpacas. There's elements like public speaking and collaborative writing. There's testing, but we try to build the imagination into each one of them. So in debating, we don't have students debate traditional topics that you might see at an MUN or a model congress. There are important topics out there that should be debated, but our forum's slightly different. So you won't find our students debating what the tax policy of Gurgaon should be, or whether India should go to war with Mars. Those are old topics. Instead, you might find our students debating with teams from Kazakhstan, or Kenya, or Canada, or some other country that starts with the letter K. And at that point, most students will turn and think, does Canada start with a K? And they will not really question it, but then that's one step in that sort of whimsical path, because you just act as if it does. They might find themselves debating with these teams from these places. How different the story of Romeo and Juliet would have been if it were set on Mars, because Elon Musk decided to send them for some reason. He does weird stuff. Or we might ask them to imagine a special telescope, kind of a magical one. And if you look through this telescope, you would not see the stars above or your neighbor's house over there, unless you really want to. You might see your own life the way it would have been if you made a different decision. If you went to a different GD Goenka school, or to some heritage school in Masan Kunj. Or if you had grown up somewhere else because your parents had decided to move when you were young. And we like to ask students for that debate, would you want to look through it? And many students say yes, because they're bold and curious teenagers. But many say they wouldn't, because like me, they're masters of indecision and regret. I use up my BetterHelp.com subscription really quickly. But the point, of course, in debate is often, and one of the main points of it, is not just learning to speak publicly. It's learning to argue the other side, to imagine yourself in someone else's shoes. Right? Imagination is intertwined with empathy. That will help them understand others. I like to remind students that that will not necessarily help them change other people's minds. It is super hard to change someone's mind. In the holiday season, many of us try that at the dinner table. We often fail. I've been trying with my dad for about 20 years since he started watching something called Fox News. But at least you understand where they're coming from. In the writing at the World Scholars Cup, we give students a chance to write in any format they'd like. Maybe one will write an imaginary diary. Does anyone here keep a diary of all the things that happened in their life? Did anyone keep one when they were a teenager or a child? Often, students do, and they think no one else cares about what happens to them. But who here liked reading other people's diaries when they were small? Yeah, there's this amazing potential to be a bestseller if you write a diary. Anne Frank did it, but didn't work out so well in the long run. Students might write stories or fake Instagram posts or poems, or they might choose to write a traditional essay. But they have the choice to imagine the answer and the approach that they think will work best for them. in any of these subjects, whether it's science, technology, art, music, social studies. And every year we pick new topics for them to explore because knowledge is essentially limitless. One topic we don't do, just as a side note, is mathematics. Not because we don't love math, but because what happens in programs about math is often you're just testing students for what they already know and what they've already studied. We want to give them new things that push their imaginations in new directions. So every year we pick new things. This coming year we're going to be exploring the theme of reigniting the future. Now, how did we tell them what they'd explore? Students get so excited for what they're going to explore at the World Scholars Cup that they wait to find out what next year's theme is going to be. It's kind of like finding out what the next movie is going to be in the series. So we hid the theme in a song and sent the song out. And independently, tens of thousands of students went looking through the song, trying to find the lyric as if they were trying to study an old Beatles track in reverse to find secret meaning in it. We'll announce it officially later. But in any case, they'll explore all these topics online in different ways, and then they can use them in unexpected ways. On our multiple choice test, it's really hard to do a multiple choice test in a way that is different, right? Like, we all been there, A, B, C, D, E. But at the World Scholars Cup, we realized that there was a way we could make it more playful. In our test, if a student doesn't know if the answer is A or C, they don't need to go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch an alpaca by the corn. This takes a long time, and there's also the issue of the no corn. Instead, they can answer A and C and get half credit if they're right. If they can only tell if it's one of 3 letters, they can answer 3 letters. They get it right, they get a third of a point. Answer 4 letters, get a fourth. And they look at a test question, and it looks at them, and they just want to go to the toilet and cry. They don't need to do that yet. They can do it later. They can always do that. They can fill in all 5 letters, and they'll automatically get 1/5 of a point. In other words, they can always make the best choice to share with us what they know about what they know, what they can imagine from what they've studied. Sometimes they'll be like, I know it's A, yay! And other times they'll be like, I know I should have studied, eh? But either way, it's building them up. Because knowledge, like so many things these days, is a non-binary construct, right? Like, you don't know everything or nothing. You know something about each thing. And we want to give them a chance to celebrate that. And our final event of the 4 that we do, it's called the Scholars Bowl. It doesn't really have a bowl. We give every team a really old-fashioned clicker device that looks like a cell phone from the year 3000 BC, back when numbers only had 5 letters and there was no internet access to distract people. And we ask them a series of questions on a screen. We show them videos that they have to analyze. We show them scenarios they have to figure out. And they work with their team to solve these questions. And one thing that we weave together here is we tend to use video clips of things from pop culture that somehow relate to what they've been learning. So we're connecting all these imagined worlds, a little too much anime, but all kinds of things with serious academic subjects. Because the linkages are there if you're open to them. There's plenty of knowledge in imagined things. We love doing these 4 things with them: the writing, the debating, the testing, and the bowl. But what we're really trying to do is create a culture in which you're whimsical along the way. And thus, my favorite event that we hold is an optional one, because having this is optional. But if we do our job right, they'll want to share it. It's called the Talent Show. Who here is talented? Great, some confidence. Who here has friends that are talented? Good, you're good friends. I see some people pointing at each other with awkward looks. I like that. Awkwardness is part of our program. Who has parents that told them that they were talented? Nice. Parents can be very supportive. And who is like me, untalented? Fantastic, because it is also the untalent show, and that's where the World Scholars Cup finds its heart. Who here has friends that are untalented? Who has parents that told them that, never mind. We really mean it. If we create the right culture of whimsy and imagination, then we have a place where students will feel free not just to share their traditional talents like singing and dancing and drinking water, but also the ones that are unorthodox, unusual, onion, unique. Like, we once had a scholar in Dubai that solved a Rubik's Cube with his feet. He said he learned how on YouTube Shorts. Now, you might think that sounds impressive, but let me tell you, this meant this student walked on stage, he took off his shoes, he took off his socks, and for 5 minutes wiggled his foot fingers on the cube. I did not know I wanted to succeed or give up and walk home on the foot fingers. He succeeded. We once had a student in Japan who could juggle sushi. I know, cultural generalization, but it happened. And at the end of juggling the sushi, she said, "Mr. Daniel, now you eat it." And because I take orders well, I did. And that was the day I made a major life discovery. It turns out, and this is a good, useful life hack you might need, that sweat tastes like soy sauce. So if you ever run dry on your soy sauce supply on a hot day in Delhi or Gurgaon or wherever we are now, just go outside and refill. And these are the kinds of things that happen when students feel free to share the whimsical alongside the real. At the end of one of our events, you might have medals and trophies. Of course you will. But we also give out pineapples. Pineapples are just as important in the trophies as the trophies are. Why? We did not intend for that to be so. It's another one of these story things that happens when you are open to it. 7 years ago, we were having a global event in Athens, in Greece. And one of our teachers from Indonesia knew that one of my colleagues was deathly afraid of pineapples. I still don't know why, but he hated pineapples and eggs. So he conspired to bring 30 pineapples into my colleague's room with the help of his roommate and left them all over the room and in the bathtub, all over. And that night, when my colleague, Chauncey, got back to his room, he did the normal thing you would do if you find a bunch of pineapples in your room. He freaked out. And he called for help. So we all went over to collect the pineapples, and then we found ourselves with 30 pineapples, and the next day was the awards ceremony, so we just gave them out randomly. And from that little start, when we saw how much the students loved winning pineapples, whether or not they would later put them on their pizzas, we've done it ever since. We didn't write that bit of the story, right? It was a combination of a teacher, a scared teammate, and students who the next day were overjoyed to receive a random citrus fruit with highly acidic content that I've been told can also eat a human if you have a large enough pineapple. So I advocate strongly for this idea of letting things happen, whether they are true or not, and setting up that atmosphere by yourself as an educator, starting every given day with students by sharing with them things that are both real and not real, and letting it be playful in a setting. And that can happen in a room that's all white walls or in a room that's super playful. Like, it's not the setting that matters as much as the interaction. So don't feel limited by the number of students in a room or the curriculum that you're studying. You can have whimsy in anything, and it will encourage students to be hungrier for what they're doing and to look forward to coming into the classroom. Just like I did in my high school Spanish classroom where my teacher was talking about being a tree and a vice president turning into some kind of feline creature. You look forward to these things in ways you don't look forward to just going to class for a lecture. These are things you don't need to take notes on. You just need to listen to them like you would listen to Homer telling a story or one of his many people who echoed his stories around fires in ancient Greece, right? Humans love storytelling. We love song. Many groups get this. Religions get this. There's song at any given service. And in many ways, a shared culture is a story that you relate. But we limit ourselves if we stick to the stories that are true, if we insist they have to be, if we deny the stories that can be fun along the way. So that's my approach in a nutshell. I think we have a little time. I'd love to take questions and thoughts about anything really, the World Scholars Cup, Alpacas, Harvard, Stanford, technology. Shoot them at me. I've got a few minutes before I run to China. Yes? Barney. Barney. I love you, you love me. I'll destroy humanity. Now, I sing that specifically because that was one of our test questions this summer. We showed a clip of Barney singing that, a subversion of the original Barney song, and that very much ties into the kind of thing we do. Because everyone expects Barney to sing the I love bit, and instead he ends humanity. It doesn't go so well for us people. But there's humor to be found in the end of the world with a creature that everyone thought was a weird television character. I love the fact that the things like Barney can come back in all kinds of ways. For those who don't know Barney, he's a large purple dinosaur with a lot of heart. I defer to you.
So So just waiting for questions. Anybody with a question?
I see a microphone moving around awkwardly.
Does anybody have a question for Sir?
Yes.
Ma'am?
How do you integrate this, this approach to actually teaching the serious, facts? So how that integration would happen?
I guess we'll keep this one, give you this one, don't know why. So there's lots of ways to do it. One of them is when you're in class and you're lecturing, telling stories is a great way to teach.
Yeah.
And stories can be unreal, of course, but a lot of it is in the assignments you can give. The Spanish teacher I mentioned, Dr. Serfati with the tree, she would create memos that were like simple fill in the blanks, where the blanks you had to fill in were the facts that you were looking for, but the bits in between were crazy stories, so that you could pepper in the imagined with the real. Another way to do this is by looking specifically at fictional works in any class, right? You can teach science and technology through science fiction as much as through actual science and technology. Another thing you could do is give things personalities. If you're teaching a robotics class, it seems easy to do this, right? Because the robots can have personalities. But you can also do this when you're teaching other things. If you're teaching, yes, question. I'll get to you in just 1 second. Do you have an idea? Uh-huh.
Can I?
My name is Jaya Goswami, and I'm from GD Goenka Meerut. I want to know that when you do such type of imagination, your third dimensions open somehow. And due to that, somehow you ever felt about the supernatural past? You come across that? This is something different?
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting approach. I grew up as a science fiction guy myself, so I'm more into like warp speed than I am into ghosts. But I like to believe there's more to the world than we can see and understand. And I think a lot of that is the connections between people. Mm-hmm. Like the connections between people are a lot stronger than physics can explain sometimes. It's almost like there's a strong nuclear force between humans.
Okay, thank you. So you believe in facts?
I believe in flights of fancy.
Okay.
Facts are what you need to weave the world together. But if you only have facts and you don't have thread, then it's not much of a tapestry that you're weaving, right? So if you believe in the supernatural or in a faith that you might have, or just in a tale that your grandfather told, I think that adds richness to life. And it's okay to have different things you believe in than the next person over.
Okay.
As long as you're creating something with them that they can also share.
Okay.
I know that's a vague answer, but basically I'm open-minded. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So can I, ma'am, a question? Yes, please.
So good morning, Mr. Daniel.
Good morning.
I'm Seema Sahai, principal of Sarita Vihar. And I want to say this in front of the entire Goenkan fraternity, that we have been participating in World Scholars Cup for 6 years. And every year I see the change in my students. And I personally visited Beijing. And my team members, Farah and Vinita,
Hello.
they have also been to
Thank
various
you.
global rounds.
Thank you. So you were in Beijing for the giant chair.
Yes, yes.
That's wonderful.
We all have an alpaca at our homes. So the legacy continues. And thank you to Mr. Vishal Verma and Mr. Dipankar, the entire team. And I can say that it's a great learning platform for those children.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. If I could ask you then, from your perspective, when the students first join the World Scholars Cup, do you find that it surprises them?
I think what you just explained, that it actually teases their imagination, and it's a great opportunity for them to imagine and elocute. And this is actually a great platform also for public speaking. And I have seen my children evolve. And this year there were 63 children who participated in the first round, the regional round.
I'm so glad. We love your students. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That reminds me of a couple things, actually, the public speaking bit. When I was in high school, I was deathly afraid of public speaking. I genuinely, I was scared. I quit a program because it involved doing an interview. The way that I discovered the joy of public speaking was being asked by my teacher and coach, a different teacher, he worked with me in a place called M Building, to give speeches about things that weren't real or that weren't that important. So the first speech I ever gave that I felt comfortable giving was an impromptu speech for 2 minutes on the topic he gave me. He said, "Can you speak on the state of fizz in soda pop today?" And one thing I think we try to do at the World Scholars Cup is make sure the topics students are speaking about are the kinds of topics that can allow them to get into that third dimension, who can break out of the barriers. For me, that was a clear break. From then on, I always had fun speaking because I realized that you could find the mirth and lightheartedness in a topic like that, but you could also have fun with the serious topics. It's all about connecting with the audience in some way and being whimsical.
Can I?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Good morning,
Hi.
Mr. Daniel. Just wanted to share a similar one. My niece, my very own brother's daughter, her friend suddenly had gone on a posting without telling, and the child was missing from class 6, I suppose. Then she started thinking that she's no more, she's dead. And therefore, she started imagining all sorts of things. So the mother realized that there's something terribly wrong. So when she was asked, she related the incident that my friend is no more. And the fact, it is not right. It was not the correct information that she had. Then how it was transferred from her imagination, then the mother asked her to talk about it. And today, after that, she became such a beautiful speaker. She's doing very well in NDTV. So that's what I just thought of sharing.
That's beautiful.
With imagination of something which was not very correct, negative, but that how it was turned out to be a positive aspect of her life.
Through the sharing of it.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
Any more questions? So on a personal note, actually, for many years, my children thought I was the tooth fairy.
Well, that makes sense, maybe. Some people think I'm Santa. And it's okay for them to think these things, you know?
Yes,
It's so
yes.
much of the fun.
Yeah.
For those of you who are from schools that haven't done Scholars Cup before, I know it's a bit of probably an inappropriate entreaty, but for us, and for me and those of my team that have been doing this for 17 years now, the reason we love doing it is because of the students we get to meet and do it with. And every team and every student that joins the program adds to the story and adds to the richness. So we'd be so honored to welcome more of your students to the program. And we have some great champions here in the room who probably could speak to that more than I could. But we'd love to see more Goenka. What's the term for a Goenkan? Goenkite? Goenkan, great.
Goenkan.
More Goenkans. Whether it's a small number at a regional event or far away at a global round, we try to make every local event global. And every local event kind of a dreamy experience for students. So thank you for the chance to be here today.